Hello and welcome to this virtual theater talk for the Roundabout Theater Company's production of Too Heavy for Your Pocket, written by Montserrat, formerly known as Jure Brian Holder. My name is Devin E. Hawk, and I am a teaching artist with the Roundabout's Education Department.
Hi, I'm Nafisa Monroe, and I'm also a teaching artist with Roundabout Theater Company. Hey, Devin.
Hey, Nafisa, what's up? So happy to be here with you again, doing these talks. It's a lot of fun.
Me
We tend
too.
to talk forever, but I feel like these conversations are very productive.
Yes, I totally agree. Yes, definitely.
We like to do these theater talks as a way to give you some context on the production that you're going to see and the writer of that play. But these talks are by no means comprehensive, so I highly recommend that you go to our website, and there you can find a wealth of information about every one of our productions. For each show that we produce, we create an Upstage guide, which has tons of resources, historical context around the play, interviews with the creative team, and so much more. It's a great resource. I highly recommend you check it out.
And if you are familiar with coming to the plays in person, you might have seen them there, but maybe you didn't know that they were actually all available online, which is amazing. And if you are a teacher or you teach or you run workshops, we also within the Upstage guide have some lesson plans that relate to the play and to the time period. And those are really wonderful resources as well.
So I thought for this particular production, we would start by talking a little bit about the historical context and the world of the play. Um,
Yes.
this play, this production was one of the first period dramas staged in the black box. So I think, the world of the play is very important. Um, so we're just going to give a quick rundown of
I'm glad
what
you're
got
doing
us
this
to the civil
one.
rights movement.
Yeah, the short
We
version.
had a civil war, which led to the passing of the 13th Amendment to end slavery in 1865, followed by the 14th Amendment to grant citizenship to African Americans in 1868, and then the 15th Amendment in 1870 to give African American men the right to vote.
Hmm.
And none of this went over well in the South, and Reconstruction down there was a bit of a mess as they came to terms with having 4 million new citizens.
Hmm.
From 1890 to 1908, Southern states passed new constitutions and laws to disenfranchise African Americans by creating barriers to voter registration. Voting rolls were dramatically reduced as blacks and also poor whites were forced out of electoral politics.
Yeah.
Now, while African Americans were being disenfranchised at the voting booth, white lawmakers decided that that wasn't enough. So they came up with racial segregation by law, the system of state-sanctioned racial discrimination and oppression that emerged from the post-Reconstruction South became known as the Jim Crow system. Under this Jim Crow apartheid doctrine, as long as the facilities provided to each race were equal, state and local governments could require that services, facilities, public accommodations, housing, medical care, education, employment, and transportation be separated by race. And with the law on their side, and by law, I mean the federal government backing them up on this, much of the South did indeed keep the races separate, though, of course, the equal part would come into question.
And this is where we get the term separate but equal, just to clarify. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Please continue.
And this is what birthed the civil rights movement. It was out of this era that the heroes of the civil rights movement emerged, partially inspired by the principles of Gandhi. This concept of direct action included boycotts, sit-ins, freedom rides, marches, and similar tactics that relied on mass mobilization, nonviolent resistance, and civil disobedience.
Mhm.
While efforts to enact change had previously been made through the courts, this new methodology hoped to lead to quicker results. The first major sit-in took place at a Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1st, 1960. Four students from the all-black North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College sat down at a segregated lunch counter to protest Woolworth's policy of excluding African Americans from being served. The four students sat down at the lunch counter and asked to be served. After being denied service, they presented their receipts and they asked why their money was good everywhere else in the store, but not good at the lunch counter. Often the participants would be jeered at and threatened by local customers. Sometimes they would be pelted with food or ketchup. They would be spit on. Even in some horrible cases, cigarette butts were put out on their skin. Basically, these angry onlookers were trying to provoke fights out of these protesters that never came. In the event that they were attacked physically, the student would curl up in a ball on the floor and just take the punishment. Nonviolence was a very important part of this activism.
And they were
When the local,
trained, they were all trained in this nonviolence as well. I think that's really important, that it wasn't,
yes,
this
yes,
was an organized effort and they had training for how to behave at each step.
that's a very good point. They didn't just show up at these lunch counters. They actually trained and went through quite rigorous training, simulating what they were going to encounter when they did these protests.
Yeah.
And so when the local police would come to arrest the demonstrators, another line of students would take the vacated seats. The Greensboro Sit-In was quickly followed by other sit-ins in Richmond, Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia, and in Nashville, Tennessee, where Too Heavy for Your Pocket is set.
Yeah, 1961, right, is the beginning of this play that was written by this young man, Montserrat, formerly known as Jure Brian Holder, which that name will appear on the play if you were to purchase it. But Montserrat, that is his name now, and we're going to call him Mansa from here forward. So just to be clear on that. Mansa was born in Memphis, Tennessee, actually. And he grew up wanting to be a novelist. Apparently, his mother was very strict about his television watching time. And so he read books, which is amazing. And apparently he read all of Toni Morrison, and he says, I just wanted to be Toni Morrison. But then when he went to undergrad at Morehouse, he took a drama appreciation course, and there he learned that he could write theater. And he said that was all bets were off. He did not write fiction anymore. He only wrote plays and drama from that moment forward. He had a professor. I think this is really important to point out what he claims is one of his formative professors, Dr. Allison Ligone. I apologize if I'm saying the name wrong. She's still a mentor for him, and she comes to all his plays, and she is the one who really instilled this desire to care deeply about politics and to be a part of advocacy in the way that he could. And as such, his plays really they examine the prison industrial complex, they examine human rights, like this play examines the beginning of the civil rights movement. Sometimes they examine the agricultural and environmental sustainability. For some reason, that's hard to say, environmental sustainability. But while you were talking, Devin, what really struck me actually was thinking about this time of the Jim Crow laws going into the civil rights movement. There were so many calls for artists to take part in the politics of the movement, to demonstrate the humanity of the Black man or the Black woman, of the African American community, the community of the African diaspora. And here we have this young man who was just at Yale in 2016, who's written this play about this time. Like he's the legacy of these people that you were just talking about, which I think is fascinating. And in fact, this play was inspired by a conversation he had with his grandmother, who apparently was flipping through some old photos and lands on a photo and says, oh yeah, I remember him. He left his family to go be a freedom rider. And that was kind of the moment of inspiration for him to begin this play. Also noting, though, for himself, he talks about this in an interview, that he was in school during the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, was actually picking up steam, right? This play is possibly a little bit of a personal examination, going to school, being in university versus being in the streets, marching. Which one are we to do? Which one is meant for you? Which one is going to make the most difference in your world and in the world of others? And I think this play does a really, really excellent job. Mansa does an excellent job at examining that complex nuance.
I really do like what you said about him getting the inspiration for this play from his grandmother, and the story that she told him, because it makes me think of the oral tradition. He hears this story from his grandmother, which inspires him to write a play about the the beginnings of the civil rights movement in the 60s. And this play in turn becomes a reflection for him on his place in this current movement that we face, and still in the struggle for civil rights, and him reflecting on what that means to him, and where he belongs in that struggle. I just think that's really interesting, that you know the way art is allows us to continue to have these conversations on these issues that we continue to grapple with over time. Too Heavy for Your Pocket. It takes place, as I said, in Nashville, Tennessee in the summer of 1961. The Freedom Riders were embarking on a courageous journey into the Deep South. When 20-year-old Bosie Brandon gives up a life-changing college scholarship to join the movement, he'll have to convince his loved ones and himself that shaping his country's future might be worth jeopardizing his own. The characters in Too Heavy for Your Pocket are two young African American couples who are trying to make a living in a time of great change. They are striving to make something of themselves, even though the country seems to be moving too slowly for them. Today, we think of civil rights activists like the Freedom Riders as heroes, but it's important to look at the situation without the value of hindsight. Back then, no one knew these activists would succeed, and they just knew that
They
these
didn't,
people were putting themselves in great risk.
you were putting your life on the line literally for
Literally.
this process. I mean, the late John Lewis actually lived from one of the moments when he was beaten on the Freedom Rides. He lived with an actual dent in his head for the rest of his life. That piece of the Freedom Rides was a part of him from that moment forward forever.
And he's one of the lucky ones. He lived to
Yep.
tell his story. Medgar Evers is
Yep.
lost forever. So
Yeah.
many others. So
So
yeah, it
many
was.
others.
If you were to tell anyone from that time period, any of the Freedom Riders or any of the people who lived during that era, that we would have one day a Black president, I think they would call you crazy, because based on their experience and point of view in history, that's just absurd. There's no
Right.
way.
But the other thing that I think is so important about this play is the examination of love that they have for each other, that the friends have for one another, that the husband and wives, that, Mansa doesn't mince words. He examines what a marriage is in all of its beauty and in its not beauty. It's maybe less than beautiful moments. The love really shines through to the end, which I think is so, so important, especially when we're talking about plays that examine the Black American family.
This play was presented at the Black Box Theater as a part of the Roundabouts Underground series. And basically, the Underground is it's sort of like an incubator for new plays and new playwrights. A lot of the playwrights are commissioned to come back and do other work at the Roundabout. So it's a great opportunity. Really great work being done in the Roundabout. Some of my favorite Roundabout productions are actually productions that happened in the Underground.
Yes, in the Underground, definitely. So this one, Too Heavy for Your Pocket, started as a reading that was directed by Sam Gold in 2016. And then it had its first professional production at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta in 2017. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about this production is that between the Alliance Theater production and the Roundabout Theater Company production, Mansa did a rewrite. In fact, he speaks about how at the Alliance, they honored and mounted the play that he had written, but that when he watched that production, he was able to take a more critical eye and, as he describes it, be less precious about certain parts of the play, which I think is such an important part of being a playwright, is to learn how to be less precious about things that are demonstrating that they're not working. And so, because the Roundabout Underground program provides a long preview process, he was able to refine the work, and he actually has a new beginning and a new ending for the New York debut of this play. Devin, we should also mention that Mansa is commissioned with Roundabout Theater for his next off-Broadway production. And in fact, that play is scheduled for next season at the Laurel Pels. What's the title of it?
The title is What the End Will Be, and
All
I'm
right.
really
What the
excited
end
about
will
it.
be.
Can't wait for it. It'll be one of
Mhm.
the first productions that we have when we come back to the theaters.
Yes. What the End Will Be by Montserrat. That's
So, yes, thank you so much for joining us for this theater talk. We hope that you found it informative, and we hope that you now have some insights into the play, the world of the play, and the playwright and his process. And we hope you enjoy this production of Too Heavy for Your Pocket by Montserrat. Thank you.